right, welcome to the Faith and Life podcast. My name is Mike Weaver, pastor at St. Luke Lutheran Church, and with me is,
Greg Osborne. I'm the student pastor here at St. Luke.
yeah, and we're grateful to have you along in this journey of talking about issues around faith and life. It's an ever, it's an ongoing conversation.
We'll figure it out. We'll get there.
I'll get there. It's an ongoing conversation that never ends, right? It just never does. So, and today we're going to talk about youth, hope, and faith in times of crisis, supporting the next generation through uncertainty and anxiety. It's a big topic, really
Yeah.
fruitful topic. But before we get there, we got to ask a question. I have to ask you a question, Greg.
Okay. I'm
It's the
ready.
question on the chalkboard in our fellowship hallway around the coffee area. It says, the question is, to feel rested,
Ooh.
how many hours of sleep do you need each night?
Ooh. To feel rested, I I would say probably 8 to feel rested.
Yeah,
Like, um, now the counterpoint of that is I don't think I ever feel rested then, but because that doesn't ever happen. But I'd say probably seven maybe, but I think eight's a safe number. It's not
yeah,
too much. It's not I can function on a lot less because I do it very often, but I think like those days where it's like, the kids are, grandma and grandpa's, or for some reason we get that little bit of sleep in, it's like, yeah, that's good.
yeah, totally. I would agree. I mean, 7 or 8 is optimal. 8 being optimal for me.
Yeah.
It's a different question. It would be how many hours is to feel like you function? How many hours of sleep do you need? That's a different question.
Yeah. And
That,
I think I mean that it's like I think like 6 is like the bare minimum. Like I can
yeah,
function at on 6, but it can't be on the regular.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, there's been times where I've had less than 6,
yeah.
and I can tell my thinking is slower. It's there's a fog, just a little bit of a fog to my thinking.
Hmm.
Like things don't come out very smoothly. Um, yeah, so it's a different feel under 6. And it's interesting. We were just talking about the church leadership or council on Thursday about solitude and silence. And if some reason it came up like working overnight. No, that was before the council meeting. Somebody was talking about working third shift.
Yeah.
And I said, I realized I look back in my life when I was in high school and college, I worked third shift at a radio station. And I would, like during college, I would work until 6 in the morning, walk to my apartment, uh, study a little bit, have an 8 o'clock class, grab a little bit of food, and I'd be off and I'd be up until noon. And then I get a little bit of sleep and I have to do it all over again. It was the weirdest thing. And I don't know how I functioned. I don't know. I look back, I'm like, how am I still here? I mean, it's just so
There's
my schedule was so all over the place.
that's like I mean like for me it's one of those like we used to do middle school all-nighters and like stay up all night, and like I would come home from that and I'd get like 3 hours of sleep and then function the rest of the day, and it was draining. But I can't even do that, so I can't anymore. So I can
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah. There's a point where you pass, you're like, no, I'm not going back to that. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it kind of segue into this topic, sleeplessness. When we're does create sleeplessness does create anxiety. We're more apt to be anxious. We know that psychologically, and there's studies that prove it. And certainly, it's not necessarily the next generation, but that's part of the conversation: uncertainty and anxiety. How do we support the next generation through this?
Yeah.
Uncertainty and anxiety, and especially today.
Yeah,
So, what
and
do you?
it's one of those things we know, right? But it
Yeah,
doesn't make it easier that we don't do it. It's like with that verse in Paul, like I know what I'm supposed to do. Paul says is
right.
like I know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm not. And so like yeah, I mean that's the reality of the fact is like we're dealing with anxiety like from adults, but like we're seeing it in students so much, and that shift has happened. It's always been there. It's been before COVID, and then it's just I think COVID has intensified it and brought a lot of stuff to light. Because it was already there before. COVID, and then we had went through that pandemic, and like it just put a highlight on on anxiety, especially in young people.
Do you think do you think sleep schedules affect it for youth as well?
Yes.
I mean, kids are always up late. I was always up late.
Mhm.
It just doesn't go away. But today, with with the prevalence of screens, social media, and so many things that are vying for attention that creates sleeplessness,
Mhm.
I wonder if this is all part of the picture as
It,
well.
it it is, and I mean, and that's why parents are trying to combat that. Like, my parent group, like we're talking about things and strategies that we put in place for our kids, and they talk about, they have to go to phones are charging in the kitchen by 9 o'clock at night because if you bring that device in, like their minds are they're still texting, they're reading, and then you got the studies with blue light or whatever, and they're like, if you can't sleep, read a book, right? And not on a tablet, not on a device, because it's so easy to get. So like now some parents don't do that, but it's like there is that awareness of saying we need to protect our kids' sleep. And schools are doing it. Some schools are doing that too. Like Gahanna shifted I think last year or this year, high schoolers go to school later. Uh, like my kids go to school, I think at 8 in the morning in the elementary school. I don't think high school starts till like 9 or 9:30 now. There's a
Wow.
shift because they realize kids they're staying up later with practices and sports, all the things after school, and to try and to shift that a little bit from being at school at 7:45 in the morning to 9 or whatever it officially is. And from what I've heard, parents are like it throws a wrench in some parents' schedules, right, when schools don't line up. But I think like from what I've gathered is like it's been helpful for that because they recognize that kids need their sleep too. And I mean, we just talked about this beforehand. We're adults who should know better, and we can't even fully regulate that. So when you throw a kid in the mix who's not fully developed and, a young person and who's still trying to figure things out, like, man, they're gonna stay up late playing video games, talking on the phone and things like that too. So like, we need to put some of those regulations on us, I think, too, and as adults.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, because parents lead the way.
Right.
Like a teenager, they're smart, they're savvy, they're really, I mean, amazing. But as you mentioned, the formation is still happening. The
Yeah.
formation literally of their brains. That means their cognitive functioning and de decision making is still forming, and they need support to help put some guardrails around those so that they can make the best decisions moving forward as they mature. They can start making these really good choices that start to add up after a while, just like bad choices start to add up after a while, right? They create futures. Our decisions create futures. So if we can help young people do that by putting some guardrails in, that's great. And you just already mentioned a couple of strategies like making sure the phone's plugged in the kitchen, I think you said.
Yeah.
Um, Read a book, or even the schools are weighing in on this issue as well, just creating so that strategies around supporting the next generation around anxiety and uncertainty. But you've got this book you've been reading with these parents as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Talk about that.
We've been going through this book called The Anxious Generation, by author Jonathan Haidt. I don't know how to pronounce it. I think he's a New York professor. Uh, and it just is this concept. And this book, so for context, this book came out and all the studies done were before COVID, really. So this was before the pandemic. So it'd be interesting to see, you know, a 2.0 version of this book. But it's talking about the subtext is how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. And it it talks about increased anxiety, depression, sleep deprivation, social isolation, and then it talks about how parents and schools and governments can put some footnotes and barriers in. So like I highly recommend if you're a parent, um, I wouldn't even say just of a teen. Like if you're like for me, like as a parent of elementary school kids, to read this and it can be scary, but it's a helpful thing for me to start to process of, because I think if you start thinking about this at middle school or high school, it's too late half the time, right? And so to kind of put this, but it's talking about the whole idea of how technology, social media presence has the amount of notifications kids get on their phones so they can't have their full attention. And, they go through like these studies of if you have your phone in your backpack and you're taking a test, how much more, mentally prepared you are than if you had your phone in your pocket and took that
Mhm.
test versus then if you
Interesting.
had your phone on the desk that you could see it and take the and the idea is when we see that it's an option, our mind distracts. Even if you're not looking at the notifications, we're so wired to like, someone needs me, someone's texting me,
Oh.
um, and it's one of those. It's just as like talks a lot about how we need to put up guardrails and stuff, and the idea of how students, we put up a lot of guardrails in the real world and not as many guardrails in the digital world,
Mm.
and which is also counterbalancing of we're doing a lot with our parents, right? Of the helicopter parent aspect, maybe like you hear the stories like when I was a kid, I knew when the street lights came on, I came home, right? Like, and now like you see a kid walking the street, who's 8 or 10 by themselves, you're calling the cops probably on that. Like that's how,
Yeah.
and like they're talking about like parents have to have notes now that says like I've given my kid permission to walk to said place or something. But and and I'm not saying that those guardrails aren't bad, for the real world. But then we give them access to a phone that has an infinite source of stuff that I never had access to even growing up. And then when we did have a computer in the internet, we were in a room. We had a computer room in our house, and we had one computer, and everyone knew what you were doing and looking and everything on the computer, because it was the central hub. And now you just have like we have these devices that are in our hands, and it just is it's scary, and the anxiety, and then you throw on the social media element of it is. Whew.
That's so interesting. I never put this together in my brain. So this is from what you're saying. Um, you know, I grew up in that generation where it's like you leave and you come back at when the night lights, street lights come on. We don't have
Yeah,
street lights, but you just know when the sun goes down, you're coming
right.
home. That's what happens. Or you hear mom yelling around from the neighborhood, Mike, Bob. Okay, I got to go home. Um, but the home, though, there were clear rules for the
Yeah.
home, right? But now what you're saying is we've completely flipped it around, where we have helicopter, we have when people go out,
Mhm.
like we have to be so meticulous about where they are, about all that, Life 365,
Yeah.
360
You
everywhere.
have it on your phone. You can know like
Totally.
you can check where they are at all times. You
Yep.
like there's even if your kid doesn't have a phone, you can put a chip, it's not like a little circle
Right.
uh tag as a Apple tag as they call it
Yeah.
now, and put it in their shoe or their backpack and know at all times where they're at, and you can check. And that adds an
Absolutely.
anxiety to the parent, right? Of
Sure.
of always being where are they at? Oh, they're not where they're supposed to be.
And yet now the phone has become, and this is why I never thought about it. Phone has become the neighborhood
Yeah.
where come home when the sun goes down. We don't know, we don't even know where Mike went,
Hmm.
but he's out there somewhere and we trust he's okay. And that was true back in the early 80s, late 70s. But internet is not a place where you just go, we think that's going to be the cat. They'll be safe. But
Yeah.
there's so much bad. Yeah. I mean,
There's
and
yeah,
so much things that can create so much.
there's so much evil out there and too, and like this book can be very like depressing and give you anxiety as a parent, but it's one of those like it seems obvious, right? But like you said, like we're so much focused on putting up those guardrails in their real life that we think like we give devices sometimes because as parents we're working, we're tired, we're stressed, we're not getting our sleep, and sometimes the only you know, relief that we can get sometimes is where we can just sit down and unwind on the phone. So it's easy to say, yeah, here, kid, play on the tablet, or whatever. And so they learn how to navigate stuff, at an early age with technology. And then when they get the unfiltered access to the internet, and that's just a whole nother thing.
Yeah. So you're reading this book with a group of
Mhm.
parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yep.
so, what have you found that how has that group discussion bit of support for the parents themselves, or shared learning,
Yeah.
shared anxiety? Or how's that sound like?
I think it's a great plug for a small group, right? Like because I think oftentimes as parents, we're our hardest critics of like I'm not doing enough. Like, oh, look at these parents have it all together. And it's kind of one of those like in this group of like it's we always say like, hey, this is a safe space, like um, and it's just like, oh, you're struggling with this too. Me too. My kid did this, blah blah blah. Like there's this just like you're not alone. And I think so oftentimes we can feel isolated. Like even talks about the social isolation in the book as well for students. I think we feel that as parents, right? Um, and so like the idea of how can we as maybe, we haven't gotten to we're still I've read the book and we're not at the next steps phases, but I think as a small group, like, are there things that we can do in a small group community because there's those aspects of like, I had a friend years ago who they're like, we're holding out to get a cell phone for our middle schooler, like because they don't need it. We don't want this. And said middle schooler was the only kid at this party that didn't have a phone, and all the kids were texting each other. So she had no way to communicate with anyone else because they weren't talking in person. They were on their phone and like so forth. But like if you're in a community of says, hey, like we're gonna commit to our small group isn't gonna have phones until they're in high school, right? They can have tablets, devices with limited access, whatever, but they don't need the unfiltered cell phone until like high school or whatever, guidelines you put up. It makes it easier, just like in life, right? We talk, Ecclesiastics, it talks about, quarter to three strands is not easily broken. And the idea of how we as a church and community, the fellowship that we have, like the more like Paul didn't, we didn't get sent out to do ministry in life on our own, right? We were in pairs, right? Everyone has a Timothy in their life. And I think that's the same for us. Like, we're not supposed to be doing parenting. We're not supposed to be doing this stuff alone. And it makes it easier. So I think it's a natural plug for a small group of like, to have people that are like going through something together and saying, like, oh yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Like to support the next generation
Mm-hmm.
in this is parents finding support for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the first step is finding support to be able to support well the teenagers, the middle school kids, the pre-teens, and so on and so forth going through this uncertainty and anxiety. Because and I think it's a really important because leaders that are have a clear sense of self, a
Mm-hmm.
clarity about what's next, there's a peacefulness about them, affect those that follow. Look, parents are leaders in the household. And the better that parent finds that support, the more confidence they're going to feel when these things come up with their kid because they have support and they've found some insights from others and they've shared some insights and there's that strength in numbers that helps that parent navigate these things with their kid or kids.
Yeah.
It's really vitally important.
Yep.
Uh,
And I mean, I like, and it's funny because like I'm the leader of said group, and like, there's mindsets and things of mine that have shifted and changed. Hearing parents talk, I'm like, I haven't thought about it in that context, and it's a helpful thing because our kids are going through a lot, and the anxiety that is then pressurized between like the social media, or online gaming, connections for even the boys and things like that, like how many times have we I've heard the saying of like, thank goodness they didn't have camera phones and social media when I was a kid because holy
yeah.
buckets.
Mhm.
I mean, the anxiety that these students are trying to go through of like, we talked about this idea of, like it's always been there of like you have the newspaper ads or television shows of like the models of like they have to have the perfect, you know, form and things like this. But then when it's like your peers of like posting stuff on social media, like it's another anxiety change of, there's the instant reaction of how can how can, the whole instant reaction of for these students of like, oh my goodness, like I have to put on my best self online here too. And we were talking about locations for parents. Then you have the whole nother reverse of you can see where your friends are, and you
Mm,
can see where there's Snapchat and Instagram that says like shows you like, oh, your friends are here, and you can see on your location on the map sometimes, oh, all my friends are at one location and I'm not at said location. A
uh,
whole nother anxiety of why didn't I get invited to said bar? Right? Like you, there's always been like you don't get invited to a party, but when you see it in real time on your phone,
yeah,
talk about another just stuff that builds up in these young people of stuff that they have to deal with and process in a way that like we're still trying to figure it out as adults. Like they adults bicker and fight and on social media and aren't necessarily the best representations. And then we expect our kids, like we talked about earlier, with their they're still trying to grow and learn. It just adds a whole nother layer to the what these young people are going through with, and that's why we're seeing the rise in anxiety with them too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow, that's really good. It's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
It's always been around. It's even more now. Look, and I thought that the culture around us will will put out messages of what the natural conversation in society is, usually around sports, complaining about the government, complaining about the weather, and various and sundry things that are on one level, and that's fine. But to have a conversation like this about supporting our kids
Mhm.
through this time of uncertainty and anxiety takes a lot of intention that it's not that the culture is not talking about it, it just doesn't have the tools. And so to be able to like find a group
Mhm.
intentionally, to read a book together, to have a person like yourself lead the discussion through that, whether it be at St. Luke or any other place. It could be a neighborhood group of parents who just do that. Boy, that's a huge thing
Yeah.
because otherwise a parent might be spinning in their head about what do I do about this? I got to find ways. I'm going to watch the Today Show and watch some for some tips. And that's fine. There's nothing terribly wrong with that. But if you want to go deeper and find more support, you just find people that you want to
Yeah.
find support with.
Yeah, and then you can read these books and they have ongoing stuff online about it. There's also like if your kid's going through mental anxiety and you're like you need more like man like at least in Ohio, Nationwide Children's Hospital is a great resource. Like the amount of information that they put out there for parents that how to deal with kids going through mental anxiety and stuff like this and mental health like there's so much good information out there too so like if that is something like that's a plug of get plugged into a group if you can't find a group reach out to search Nationwide Children's Hospital in Ohio at least, and they'll get some information about how to get into maybe these groups because there are places that are doing this and book studies like this all the time. So
Yeah, absolutely. And they could always reach out to you. I mean, to help.
yeah,
Uh, you can point them in the right direction,
oh for
and
sure,
just as you did, or have a conversation.
yeah,
You're certainly here. I am. I'm telling you that you're available, but I know you. You would make yourself available
I
to have
would, I
that with
would. So
do that. So, well, I appreciate the conversation,
mhm.
Greg, as always. Hope it's been helpful to those who are listening. Thanks for listening, and we'll jump in again with a new topic next week.
Sounds good.
See
Till
you.
next time.